Hello and welcome to part 4 in a 5-part series on the 12 powers of man and the 12 steps to realization. Today we're talking about removing the obstacles to that realization, titled Sweeping the Path. I'm Reverend Matthew Long from the Peace Unity Network, and there's a link to our website down below if you'd like to know. If you haven't watched the first three videos, I invite you to go do that, and that'll help set a background for this. Today we're talking about sweeping the path, and this comes from a story that I heard some years ago regarding a young man who had come of age, and when they came of age, they were to apprentice themselves in this village. That was how young men would find their work in life, their role in life. And this one particular one, long story made short, he decides to apprentice himself to the shaman or the medicine man, and he goes and tells the medicine man, and the medicine man hands him a broom and says, "Sweep the path." And so he goes out and he sweeps, the leaves and the branches off the path, and then he comes back. And every time he comes back, the medicine man says, "Sweep the path." And each time he gets a little bit more involved in the path, replacing the rocks, making patterns in the path, until finally he becomes absorbed and becomes the path. In other words, he becomes so absorbed in what he is doing, that what he is participating, that he has become his work. He has become the path. And that at that point, the medicine man comes up, taps him on the shoulder, and says, "Now you are ready to learn." So life is not a goal, but a journey that we get to participate in. Same with peace of mind, health, prosperity, abundance, goodwill, divine guidance, direction. All these things are part of the journey. They are not goals to be achieved, but they are a journey to participate in. And when we learn to participate wholly, completely, fully, that's when we experience peace, wholeness, and abundance in all good things. So we've been looking at these 12 powers of man, these 12 spiritual faculties, I like to call them, divine ideas, that these are fundamental divine ideas in the mind of God, and that the Christ is that holy, perfect, sinless pattern, and that these 12 make up departments within the Christ, just like departments within a factory or a business, that there are department heads, and each one of these has a department head that is represented by the disciples, if you will. So the first one we're talking about today is will. I'm going to be talking about order as well. And the power of will can be, Charles Fillmore calls it, the executive power of mind. The executive power of mind. In other words, this is the one that guides and directs all the others. That when we are willing for God to work through us, then we guide and direct our spiritual faculties in divine order. If we are willful, full of our own self-will, then we tend to run into obstacles. That's when we come into problems. Charles Fillmore calls this talking about will. The will is the man. Says, as the executive power of mind, human will is the negative pole of spiritual decision. So it's looking at this as kind of a bipolar sort of thing. We can be willing for God to work through us, or we can be full of our own self-will. So whether we're willing or willful, and when we're full of our own self-will, that's when we experience suffering. That's when things don't go our way. That's when people and places and things don't do what we want them to do, and so we get all caught up in trying to make things happen. One of the first 4 noble truths is the truth of suffering, which comes, and the second noble truth is the cause of suffering, which is our own selfish desires. I call it wants versus desire. Desire is of the Father, so technically our desires are for an experience, whereas our wants are for things. And so it's for that selfish desire or wants that causes the suffering. And it's wants, and then the third noble truth is the truth of the cessation of suffering, and then the fourth noble truth is the path towards the cessation of suffering, which is the eightfold noble path, which includes right thinking and right doing and right occupation, etc., etc. And so we're talking about the right relationship of the will, the right use of our will, to be willing for God, to be willing for good, be willing to be channels for God's good, versus being willful and creating that selfish desire for things to go our way. And that will and understanding are closely related. Closely related. In another book of Charles is called Mysteries of Genesis, when he talks about that the 7 days of creation, and we look at it as a creative process. And on the fourth day, the sun and the moon, the greater light and the lesser light, are created. And then he calls these representative of understanding and will. And that our will should be a reflection of our understanding. Or is a reflection of our understanding, just like the moon is a reflection of the sun. Now, if our understanding is that we are holy, perfect, sinless children of God, and that we are channels for God's great good, and we operate out of that understanding, then our will reflects that, and then we are willing for God to work through us. If it's otherwise, it's otherwise. And so that's the proper use of our faculty of will. And that will and understanding and imagination all are closely related. Imagination is right at our third eye point, seeing creatively. We talked about that in an earlier lesson. And understanding, Charles places in the frontal lobe, and will as well, essentially in a very similar part of the frontal lobe. I talked before about how breathing is key to clear expression of our understanding, our will, and our imagination, as well as faith. Because if we don't breathe deep enough, then we're not feeding that frontal lobe of our brain, the brain stem, which is our bird brain, if you will. It controls the lower functions, the heartbeat, and the things that have to happen in order for us just to be alive. And that's one reason why if somebody doesn't breathe long enough, that their frontal lobe dies, but the body can continue to live even though they're brain dead, so to speak. But there is that animalistic, reptilian bird brain, if you will. So if we don't breathe deep enough, we're not feeding that frontal lobe correctly. We're left being literally bird brains. So and if you don't want to be a bird brain, you have to stop and breathe and make sure that you're taking long, slow, deep inhales and long, slow, deep exhales, that you're totally oxygenating our brains. And so if you're having some unclear thinking, think in terms of breathing, being in touch with our breath. To energize. And we think I like to place the understanding over my left eye and the will over my right eye, because the left eye is my dominant. If you're right-handed, the left eye is your dominant, and the right eye is the subdominant. And so and then the imagination, and so focusing in on our breathing and focusing on our imagination, will, and understanding. The disciple that represents will is Matthew. And that the sight is, as Charles says, in the center of the brain, or perhaps over the left eye. That's this will and understanding. Learning to become willing. And when we become willing, then we begin to see divine order. And that's the second faculty that we're looking at today, which is order, spiritual law and order. And we think in terms of the law of manifestation, or the law of mind action, a divine order, in the sense that involution precedes evolution. That's one of the things he says in this chapter on order, on spiritual law and order. That involution, in other words, as within, so without. So whatever we are experiencing in the outer, that doesn't mean that we have created this physical reality, but our experience of that physical reality is based on our own involution. So involution precedes evolution. You can think of people who go to a show and see the show, and one person comes out and says, "Oh, that was the worst thing I ever saw." Another person says, "Oh, that was so wonderful." What was it? Well, for one, it was yuck, and for one, it was wow. It is what it is. We are the ones who decide what it is for us. And so involution precedes evolution. So if you're a negative person, you've got to work on creating a positive. We talked about how the will is the executive faculty, and our human will is the negative pole of the divine will. And so it's lifting ourselves up. And it's the same in divine order. And how we do that is through the law of manifestation, if you will. It's also the metaphysical trinity: mind, idea, expression. Charles Fillmore says it's exercising divine order, which is mind, idea, and manifestation. Mind, idea, and manifestation. This is also the metaphysical trinity of how we create our worlds. Thoughts from the divine mind enter into our mind. Divine ideas enter into our mind, and we create ideas that start taking shape and form in our minds that then we can press out or express out into existence, into manifest reality. He also talks a lot about the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, because the law is man-made. Even the Ten Commandments, all the laws of the Old Testament, these came through people. So the divine ideas came to Moses, and he interpreted them to the extent of his ability to interpret them into the Ten Commandments that have come to us through the book of Exodus. And all the other laws are man-made. And so looking to the spirit of the law. What is the spirit of the law? If you look at the Ten Commandments, the first 4 are all about our relationship to God. The other 6 are about our relationship with each other. and Jesus brought it down into 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. These are the 2 great commandments. Love is the great commandment. So will and order, spiritual law and order. He talks about the perpetual Sabbath, right? The Sabbath was made for man, not man made for the Sabbath, and that God is on a perpetual Sabbath, right? He got to the 7th day, and we are currently still on the 7th day. That God continues to work every day, and we continue to work every day and every moment. But we need to create space in our days and space in our weeks in order for us to become clear channels for God's good. If we're constantly doing, then we have no opportunity for that channel to be clear channels for God to work through us. If we were meant to be always doing, God would have called us human doings instead of human beings. We have to be with God. We have to be the path in order to express God's great good in our lives clearly and wholly. And the spiritual faculty is located in our navel. And the disciple is James, who represents divine order, law and order, if you will. And that takes me back to my transcendental meditation days. And a lot of people like to joke about it, call them navel gazers, because that's one that it's actually all the chakra points, but the navel is one that gets a lot of attention. And part of it is because that's where order, that's where digestion happens, right? Things happen in divine order. And if we are feeling out of order, if we're feeling out of control, often, we have digestive problems. All of these spiritual faculties have their negative poles when they're not being used properly. We get headaches, right? Whether depending on where the headache is, whether it's in the center of the brain or the base of the brain, then these all relate to the expression of our spiritual faculties. When we get to the 12 steps, this is where we're really sweeping the path. This is where we make a list. So we're on to steps 8 and 9 in the 12 steps of recovery, which is, 1, we made a list of all persons we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Here the willingness comes in. That word literally is used in this. We're talking about will. How well these 12 spiritual faculties, in the order that Charles Fillmore laid them out, relate to the 12 powers of man. And I talked earlier about the indirect relationship with Bill W. And Charles Fillmore. Make a list. Become willing. Emily Cady, in her book Lessons in Truth, talks about that word, talks about forgiveness. This is we're getting that process of forgiving ourselves and forgiving all others, and that forgiveness is not what most people think. Saying I'm sorry, right? Forgiveness is actually about giving for. To give, to forgive. That's where the word comes from in original English. To forgive. In other words, to give before. To give love for whatever has been received. That it doesn't matter what other people are. It's up. We too often allow others to decide how we show up. I have the choice in how I want to show up. I can give love for whatever others are giving me. And then the 9th step is make direct amends to such persons, except when to do so would injure them or others. There's a caveat that we don't want to create more destruction in our making amends, in our seeking forgiveness and giving forgiveness. This is part of that divine order, as within, so without. That we have to sweep that path. We have to get all that stuff out of the way. That as long as there's any unforgiveness, and whether it's on our part or someone else's part, and whenever there's any resentment, whenever there's any fear, those are things that are in the way of our experiencing serenity, peace of mind, wholeness, abundance, prosperity, health, guidance, direction, all those divine experiences, divine order and divine timing that we are desiring. Jesus said it this way: be reconciled to your accuser. In the Sermon on the Mount, he says, if you're going to give your gift on the table, on the idol, on the altar, and somebody has something against you, go and be reconciled with your accuser, and then come back and give your gift. The accuser, that's the same terminology as Satan, Satra, which means the accuser, the tempter, the tester. Satra, which comes through as Diablos, or the devil. When we get into the Latin. And it's just, be reconciled with that dark side, if you will. Clean up the past, clean up our messes, and then we can come to the altar with clean hands and clean hearts and clean minds. We have swept the path, we have prepared the way to receive that great good that God has for us. God is I am. That's the name of God. God is I am that I am. Tell them that I am has sent you. God is that essence of being within us. That's the Yahweh God. That's the immanent God. That's the God that works in and through and as us. God is also Elohim, El Shaddai, all-powerful. El, that transcendent God that makes all of creation possible. God is one, just as we are one with God. God is I am. All that God is, I am, can do and be, which through Christ, which strengthens me. This is our affirmation for this class, and I hope you're taking this with you and using it during the week. God is I am. All that God is, I am, can do and be through Christ, which strengthens me. So it is, and so it shall be. God bless, and have a wonderful day. See you later.